Hey guys, let's talk a bit about gunnery tactics and specifically deflection shooting. Most of you are probably pretty familiar with traditional gunnery tactics. That's where you'll fall in behind another aircraft either from a dead six position or a lower angle off tail position, 5, 10, 15 degrees, maybe a bit more, maybe a bit less, whatever. You'll pull the correct amount of lead, you'll squeeze your trigger and wait for the aircraft to go down. That's what we call a tracking shot, where you're maneuvering your aircraft, pulling the correct amount of lead, and then you're tracking them with your guns throughout a very specific phase of flight. That's traditional gunnery tactics. That's gunnery 101. It's a staple of air combat. Nothing wrong with it. It works for 90% of the encounters you'll have. However, there are some encounters, some dogfights, where you'll find that the tracking shots don't really work that well. Specifically, when you have a high rate of closure at a high angle, you'll find that it's very hard to get your guns on target long enough without putting your own aircraft at a disadvantage or maybe overshooting. Enter deflection shooting. Deflection shooting, strictly speaking, is any kind of shot that requires pulling lead. So even a dead six position shot, if you're pulling, some kind of lead, is technically deflection shooting. But when we talk about it, we're referring to the art of deflection shooting, and that's where we rely on being very accurate and very precise at very high angles of attack. And the reason why this is important is because there's certain times during dogfighting, say as when you're e-fighting or when you're approaching a slower opponent and you're going really, really fast at it, crossing them at a high angle, that these are shots you don't want to miss. You may only have this one opportunity, or just due to the nature of the fight, you can't turn around and take a second shot. It's deflection shooting is taking advantage of these opportunities. More importantly, what it lets us do is it lets us sort of forego having to track the opponent through tracking shots, because tracking shots they're sort of not really random, but you never know when you're going to get one. It could be 3 seconds into the fight, it might be 5 minutes later. However, we do know that any time that we're encountering an opponent, and assuming that they fly the way that they should, according to air combat maneuvering (ACM), then you know that they're always going to try, for example, to brake turn across your nose, and that you're probably going to have anywhere from an 80 to a 100-degree deflection shot right there. Well, that's where deflection shooting comes in important, because it allows us to know that, okay, if we can consistently learn how to nail these 90-degree shots, then we no longer have to worry about tracking shots, because anytime that we fight an opponent, even when they go offensive, they're presenting us with shots. So that's sort of deflection shooting in a nutshell. Let's look at a few scenarios and see where deflection shooting is useful and how to do it. So let's look at a dogfighting matchup here. We've got a TA-152 bearing down on an LA-7. The TA-152 is coming up from behind the LA-7 and is, a few hundred yards out. The LA-7, seeing the TA-152, goes into a braking left-hand turn. So let's look at the defender on the LA-7 and their flight path, and where they're at this point in time and where they will be at in the near future. The LA-7, forgetting about the TA-152, if they continue on their current flight path, on this current brake turn, it's going to bring them around in a circle back to where they originally started or initiated the turn. So this is important, knowing what the turn will look like uninterrupted. Now let's look at the TA-152 on their current flight path. They're already making a slight left-hand turn, tiny bit of lead. So if they continue on that flight path, they will intersect with the LA-7's flight path, but they will never be intersecting at the same time or at the same point. So even though there's an intersection, neither aircraft are going to have a shot. Obviously, this isn't very useful to either aircraft, but the point here is that obviously you can't just continue on a flight course. That's why the brake turn is effective. As the LA-7 goes into a brake turn, the TA-152 has to pull harder to achieve a gun solution. So what would the TA-152's corrected flight path look like? Well, if they pull into the LA-7, the LA-7 will then adjust their course. Now the TA-152 is going way too fast and will go into an overshoot. This is what the LA-7 is trying to cause from the brake turn, and being as the LA-7 is the more maneuverable and faster aircraft, and the fact that they're on the deck, this would be bad news for the TA-152. Now, there is a chance that the TA-152 might get a few shots off on the LA-7, but again, it's very iffy, because to make those shots, they then have to commit to the overshoot. And this is where tracking shots in traditional gunnery really they don't really favor high-speed passes. In the case of the TA-152, that plane is completely outclassed by the LA-7 on the deck. So the only way for the 152 to win this kind of engagement is to specifically not follow through the brake turn and not burn off their energy trying to stay with the aircraft for a tracking shot. So let's take a look now at a different example, a deflection shot of the TA-152. The LA-7 goes into a brake turn. The TA-152 slightly adjusts course so that their guns, or that their nose, their gun's trajectory will still intersect with the LA-7's flight path at the same point that they cross it. If you notice, the angle is still 90 degrees, so there's really not much of an overshoot factor. The TA-152 is overshooting, but not any worse than the LA-7 is overshooting them. There's still, more than a 90-degree angle. There's probably more like a 110 degree angle between them. So that's enough of an angle that the LA-7 is not going to be able to reverse into the TA-152. This is a deflection shot, and this is sort of what we want to talk about, where we want to cross them at a high angle on purpose, so that the defending aircraft still has to pull very hard all the way through, and they never have a chance to reverse onto the attacking aircraft. At the same time, us being the attacking aircraft, we have a chance to shoot them throughout that turn, because we know that they're going to cross our nose at a specific point in time. And because, again, it's a deflection shot, we know it's going to be roughly a 90-degree shot. We know it's going to be nose low, and we know where they're going to go after they overshoot us. Remember, this is just as much of an overshoot for them as it is an overshoot for us. And this is the basis for deflection shooting. So all of this sounds great, right? But it's just that. It's simply theory and images on a screen. Let's see firsthand how to actually employ it so we can functionally use it. Here's a fight that I had the other day from a training session. It's a TA-152 versus a Spit 16. So here we have an overshoot, which we'll use the vertical immediately after going through the overshoot, and we'll reverse onto the opponent. As I come out of I'll climb up and then roll back down. As I bring my guns around onto the opponent, notice that I go nose low. This is so that I have a vertical offset, so that as I'm tracking the opponent, if he continues to go nose low, then I'll already be lined up with him. I'm going nose low on purpose. If he goes nose high, that's not a problem. We can pull up into him for the most part, and he'll be slow, and then we can just come back around on him. So here I am. I wait for him to come across my guns, pull, and fire. I'm letting the opponent come into my guns, and I'm firing at the correct time. All I'm using is roll rate to make sure that my nose stays in line with his flight path. I come back around again, stay nose low. As he starts to commit to his current flight path, pull up, fire, and we have 30mm hits. It's really that simple. Alright, so let's talk about the steps to deflection shooting. The first step is to offset your flight path below your opponent. That means go nose low, push forward on your stick. The second you see your opponent go wings vertical, they roll to pull into that turn, you push forward on your stick and go nose low. Offset it by 20-30 degrees or so. The reason for this is that it allows you overhead. It allows you room to move, to maneuver, and pull back up into them if you need to as you get closer to that overshoot. This is important because if you don't allow for this and they go nose low on you for any reason, they'll go underneath your aircraft, and most aircraft at that point, they can't respond quickly enough at high speed to an under the nose or a negative G maneuvering kind of shot. So it's important to allow that overhead. The secondary reason is if your opponent is any good and he sees you go nose low, he's going to go even lower on his turn, and in turn you should adjust yours further nose low. What he's trying to do is allow himself room to get under your nose. By doing this, though, he's getting faster and faster and faster, and therefore becoming less maneuverable. So it's actually advantageous to you to force him to go even further nose low. So that's the reason for offsetting your flight path in the vertical. So step one, push forward on the stick, go nose low. Second step, roll to where your opponent will exit their turn. This isn't turning, it's rolling. So roll so that your lift vector, the top of your canopy, is pointed to where your opponent will roughly exit their turn. Right? Step three, once you've rolled, pull into that area so that your flight path will intersect where they're going to come out of their turn. It's a lead turn. You're not trying to follow them through their current turn. You're leading and you're pointing at that point in space where they're going to come across and overshoot you. You'll overshoot them through that brake turn. right as you come through it, and right before your opponent comes through that arc, if you predicted it correctly, they will be coming right through that. You want to mash your trigger. You want to fire a burst through it, not just a simple burst like you would with a tracking shot, but you want to hold down your trigger for half a second or so. And as you get better and better, you won't need this as much. But that burst is to allow them time to fly through your shots, because when you get to these high angles at high airspeed, shooting it's very difficult. It requires a lot more lead. But anyway, so fire a burst. They should fly through your bullets. If you didn't down them on the first pass, the nice thing is you've both overshot each other, and you're already at high speed. You've bled off very little airspeed due to this kind of maneuver, and you can pull back in the vertical, reverse, and set back up. And that's all there is to it. Of course, these steps are simply their guidelines. This is how you go about executing deflection shooting in a perfect environment. In the actual main arena in real dogfighting, things change. So use these as guidelines and adjust them as you need to. Let's watch a few more training examples, and then we'll cut to some clips of actual deflection shooting in the main arena.
I can make you chase me this one. You got ammo.
Or something like that. It's pretty much like, you wait till they get in. It's like, this, point the wingtip.
Man, I'm flying on the side of this guy.
Oh, I nailed him.
Oh, he's a pain.
If you're gonna brake left.
I'm good. Saw that flyman's dead.
Who the hell flies an A6M up here?
Retard maybe? Oh, he's on me. Lucky guy.
I'm heading over there.
I'm not sure if he'll need to or not. He's down. He's down. He over-G'd.
Coming in.
Got a C.
Check C2. I'm in on the C2.
Okay, 109's down. So that's deflection shooting. It's not the easiest shooting practice in the world, but it is definitely worthwhile, especially if you fly aircraft that have very hard-hitting guns packages, such as the Focke-Wulf series, the TA-152, even some of the British aircraft like the Typhoon or the Tempest. Being able to deliver a lot of firepower in those small but consistent shot windows, those are very rewarding, especially in arenas like the main arena in Aces High. I hope this was all clear and concise. If it's not, or if you have